Hey, everybody. Uh, welcome to our webinar, The Modern Data Architecture, Unlocking the Full Value of Your Data. Um, I feel so excited about today. My name is Khetan, VP of Product Marketing at Tealium. And before I just start ranting about all the stuff that I want to talk about, let me just introduce our awesome panelists. So, Joe, let me start with you. Can you introduce yourself?
Thank you, Saf. I'm Joe Vellaiparambil, currently VP of Data and Analytics at Allied World. It's a PNC insurance company. I've been in data and AI for close to 15 years now. Started my journey at Mass Mutual, about 6 years there. From there, I've moved on to Travelers, and after that, I was Chief Data Officer at AXA Equitable before I took on this role. But more importantly, I'm a student, but also I'm passionate about leveraging value out of data and AI.
That's great. I think we can dig into some of that as we talk. Nick, I'm gonna go to you next.
Yeah, so I'm Nik Acheson. I lead the data strategy, architecture, and engineering here at Engine as part of Highmark Health. So it's about a $30 billion technology organization, payer, provider, insurance across different stages and areas. So prior to being here, I was the chief data officer at Okera and most recently Dremio. And prior to that, I've been fully on this side of the table. So I've led data analytics platforms globally for Nike, Zendesk, Philips, Concur, and even started my career at the National Security Agency.
Wow, lots of diversity in the
In
vertical.
many places at this
Yeah, I
point.
love it.
I'm
And
ready to
then
settle in.
yes, for sure. And Dustin, let's go to you.
Hi, yeah, I'm Dustin Horning. I lead the professional services team for Tealium, which is a customer data and data streaming platform. I've been in the customer experience and customer data industry for 10, 15 years now, always on the SaaS side and always with implementation. I say, some people are good at building a hammer, some people are good at selling a hammer. I want to be the one swinging the hammer. So I really love that rubber meets the road point where we really have to actually show the value in a technology. And I'm really happy to be doing that with Tealium.
Oh, wow, I love it. I love the analogy. So, for our listeners, thank you for joining. I can't believe it's almost August already. That's blowing my mind, actually. We've been talking about that today. But for everybody on the call, you have the Q&A button down there. Please feel free to use that. We'll keep checking for questions along the way. And, if they fit in the talk track, we'll address them. Otherwise, we'll address them later into the session. But let me introduce our topic for today. And then we can go from there. So we've all been having this conversation when we met for preparations and in our work. Just data complexity is at a whole different level these days. And even last year, I didn't think I would be talking about some of the things that we've been working with this year. It's going really fast, and the pressure on the data leaders in the roles like Joe and Nick have, and even in the implementation that Dustin has to do, the pressure is very different and it's mounting, it feels like, constantly. And in this world, what kind of choices are we making to drive business value? Where are we doing trade-offs? How does governance and compliance and quality and flexibility, all this stuff, how does it all fit together? That's what we want to talk about today. And our goal is to try to bring out, even from regulated industry, but also just all the other experiences we've had, how should we all think about this stuff? And where are we all making bets? And then where are we don't know what we don't know, so we're trying to figure that out. So that's kind of where we want to talk about today. I'm going to start first with just this idea of single source of truth. I want to start there because Tealium has a CDP and we've been talking about single source of truth for a decade now. And let me start with you, Dustin. I just wanted to can you anchor us to what is single source of truth and what was the vision versus what's happening now?
Yeah, absolutely. I think from my perspective, single source of truth is this concept that came with all of these really good intentions. People were realizing that there are a lot of data questions out there and people could get different answers depending on where they went. Or there might not be a complete enough data set for you to be able to answer the question that you want. And so the idea was, well, let's put all the data together. Let's have this unified view and this one consistent method of being able to respond to these data problems. And the issue that comes from that, we've made a lot of good progress there. I think we've broken down a lot of silos and we've standardized on some of that. But the reality is that different data questions have different data needs. And by trying to force everyone down one path into one, drawing from the same well for the source of data, you can create bottlenecks. You can create unnecessary steps for what are generally quicker questions, or really confuse things. And it's always going to be an ever expanding problem. There's going to be new data questions to answer. It's new consumers of that data. So by consolidating everything into one place, that's really over solving for one issue of data deduplication. And so what you really want is to understand that each data question should have a single source of truth, but that source of truth might look different depending on the question and the context and the audience. And you need to be able to serve those different needs from different places, as long as you stay aligned as an organization on how that works.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, we started with this problem of silos, and I wonder if we were overcorrecting and imagining that single source of truth actually meant one data set. So I know, Joe, when we were talking about this, we were talking about this idea of centralization versus federation, and now, as Dustin mentioned, there might be more than one single source of truth. Do you want to expand on that a little bit? How are you thinking about it?
So I mean, the concept of having more than one single source of truth, I wouldn't subscribe to that. I would say single source of truth, the vision is still a reality. Say, for example, in an organization like ourselves, we have policy data, we have claims data, we have several domains of data. For each of those domains, you need to have a single source of truth. And what probably Dustin is alluding to is the platform. Now, if you say that you need to have the single source of truth and it should all be conformed to one particular platform, that's a tall ask. You're trying to then migrate the data from multiple sources into one place, and that's all you will be doing, and you will not be focused on the business value. So, if you can think about single source of truth, you obviously need it. You need to govern it, and the governance, and I'm sure Tealium would attest to that. The governance is probably the most important part of it. When you have proper dictionary, you have proper lineage, and you know what the definitions, and you implement data quality at all levels. And then you can think about federation, and you can think about how do I govern data in place, and for analytics, for AI, how can we bring that model context protocol answers some of that questions. But you have to balance value versus migrating the data.
Yeah, Nick, I can tell you were going to say something.
Yeah, no, I'm going to try really hard not to keep cutting people off. But we'll see where I
Please
am by the
don't
end of
go
the
for
call.
it.
Yeah, let's keep it
Um,
dynamic.
no, I think it's an interesting topic, and I think and what my argument would be, we've shifted away from conversations about single source of truth, and maybe more so talked about like what's a fact and where's a fact, right? And making that as agnostic as humanly possible to where those facts live, because guess what? The business doesn't care. Now that data is in Oracle, it's in Salesforce, it's in Snowflake, right? They're trying to solve business problems. And I think from the technology side, we don't want them to care about where it's at, because we want to continue to modernize, right, and speed up and take away some of the debt. And the best way to do that is make that as invisible as possible too. So I think, especially now with the advent of Iceberg and agents, and like throw all of your fun Gartner words out there and play around for a moment. But I think this is where we're seeing really the importance of a catalog. And I don't mean a catalog, like the catalog ecosystem of a company, right? To go, where is this data? Like one, and not to riff too much down this track too, it's knowing what's a fact, what's having spectrum visibility to all the data that's out there, and then continuing to kind of go back to like, where's a fact and how do I maintain that fact? I think that becomes the piece of like, great, when I talk about Sav, I only have one Sav, right? When I talk about a customer, like, not to take a shot at any old company by name, but like ESPN is not the same as ABC, which is not the same as Disney, which, oh, by the way, we had 6 Disney contracts. And like, it's more about the fact. If I have all that in one transactional location or analytic location, right, that's hard. That takes years to maintain that, right? Especially with the advent of more SaaS tools coming into play. We got to change it to go like, what's a single source, to go, how do I establish and maintain facts, regardless of where that data is?
Yeah, I love this. Yes, 100% agree, right? Like Joe, as you said, lots of different domains, and all the domains you need clarity in that within that domain. Now you might not all be in one platform, but then you have the issue, like you said, Nick, of the catalog. How am I looking at this as one? Am I looking at this as one? But really, business doesn't care, and business shouldn't care. And I feel like along the way, single source of truth originally started as this vision that data is too siloed and fragmented. Let's try to have a solution. And then the solution became the goal. And it's very easy to lose sight of why you're doing that and then get lost in the why, the how and not the why. So I love that you guys brought us there. So what are you guys advising in your companies about this? How are you guys looking at this stuff right now? Are you having to deal with this problem? I'll let any of you go for it. Yeah.
No, absolutely. Again, we start when you look at an architecture, a modernized architecture, you always look at what business value do you want to solve, or what business problem are we solving, and what kind of data is required, and do you really need to move the data, and is this fit for purpose? Is it can I deliver analytics out of where the data is? So it has the business value has to drive the architecture and the and how we organize the data for consumption. So that's the kind of direction we take at our organization.
Yeah, we're going through a full data strategy refresh here, and to be frank, like I've done one almost every company that I just listed earlier. Joe's absolutely right. The two areas you usually mess up. One is people go and be really smart building stuff in a back room, think if I build it and they'll come, and you just end up with more systems and nothing ever gets shut down. So it's really anchoring in, making the technology as invisible as humanly possible, but continuing to drive better impact for your customers, right? And for the business. The other side where people mess up is not bringing enough people along either. So making sure it's really clear that you don't turn into a skunkworks team, but really drive the organizational transformation. And I've had some failures in my career on that one. I learned the hard way. But so we're in the heat of it right now. And I know we're going to touch on this later, but I think one of the biggest things we're kind of anchoring on internally here is, as we look at all the headwinds on every industry out there, it doesn't mean we all consolidate into, a single ecosystem or otherwise. It's about how do we maintain enough flexibility that we can continue to leverage and take the opportunities to drive those transformational and big bet experiences that don't take 3 to 5 years to do and don't take 5 to 10 years to rip out. And I think those are the pieces that we're kind of anchoring on as we start thinking about and again, with the advent of even of AI, right? It's like you've got to have a lot of flexibility in your architecture and ecosystem and openness to continue to leverage these capabilities.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Dustin.
and Nik, I'm curious about that point. Do you feel like the solution then is really small modular components that are kind of purpose built so that they're more easily replaceable and plugged in, or what is the practical application of an agile architecture?
Yeah, I think it's more about principles. Because the thing I want to be conscious of in your questioning, because I can hear a couple of internet trolls in the back of my head going, the modern data architecture, right? It's like, well, no, we all know like you don't build and bring in a tool for every single piece of your ecosystem. And
Right.
back to even the question in the chat, Fabric's like a North Star, right? There's no catalog, for example, or entitlement service, for example, in the world that can connect everything. But the thing you don't want to then do is to go, great, well, then let me move everything into one platform and one ecosystem either. That's not the right thing to do. So I think there is this middle ground, right? If you look at some of the more advanced companies in the world really driving and pushing our maturity, what are they doing, right? It's more of the doubling down into these open ecosystems with Iceberg, for example, right? Looking at MCP and agent to agent and going, great, how much can I leverage with open? How much am I not diving into one individual customer that's kind of getting me locked in, and having enough balance between those to go, hey, I have enough flexibility that if I wanted to change out this part, again, it doesn't impact my whole ecosystem, and I can kind of do that a little bit more invisible. So I think as you adopt into some of these core patterns and technologies, there's still going to be gaps, right? There's still a long way to go for everything I just said. But I think it's the signals to go, how easy is it to fail forward as well as, to fail safely.
Right. And as long as you have that North Star, that aligned direction, then even if you kind of have to veer in your path and how you get there, you're still ultimately building towards where you want to get to.
Right. Because like we have tools that we use, for example, in ecosystem, and I'm like, absolutely, I'm vendor locked in on that one.
Yeah.
Right. But we're doing it for the right reason.
Right.
And you're making that a mindful decision. You're not getting surprised later on.
Yeah. The other point that you brought up that I really like and I found to be exceedingly true in every project we have with our customers is the people aspect. That any data orchestration challenge is really a people orchestration challenge at its core, and an organizational, the different business units, making sure they come together, making sure you understand who are your consumers, who are your producers, what are their needs and their wants, and making sure everyone's bought into why they're doing it. Because even if they, assign a resource on paper to go and fulfill, if they're not bought into the vision of what they're building, then they're only going to do it halfway. They're going to do the minimum that they have to. Versus when you have an aligned vision across these different units, then they're willing to engage and they'll come up with their own ideas and they'll really put their heart into the part that they own, whether that's integrating their data source or consuming the data into their reports or analytics, or whatever their need of data is.
Well, I think that's it. I know we'll maybe go to the next question, or Joe, you want to put on here. So I was going to say, like, a really cool signal actually that happened to me this morning. Because what's scary about what you just said, Dustin, is the giving enough of the flexibility to the business and the other technology teams to have that, like Michelin talks about, like, discipline at the core, flexibility at the edge, right? So like one of the material architectural changes we're making here is go, hey, here's the bounds by which we are opening up and you can operate within. This is your innovation space.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But what's scary about that is you don't control it.
Right.
What's real about it is you didn't before either, right? People were doing stuff on their desktops anyway, whether you knew it or not. But like having that spectrum visibility is important. But like a really cool moment that even happened actually this morning, a couple hours ago, somebody popped in, was like, hey, from the data strategy, session that you ran, I saw the recording. I want to come in here. Like, here's what I'm thinking about. Here's an initiative that came out through the business. we're looking at DBT for it. Are we ready? Can I just go? And I was just like, whoa. Like, I don't have to be involved in everything, right? My team doesn't have to be involved in everything. It's about inspiring and giving enough bounds that folks can innovate and go faster, not through a centralized function.
No, I couldn't agree more, Nick, on that. Our teams, the data teams, will not be in all of the conversations. Will not be in all of the conversations with business where they are discussing business problems, and the ability for data and AI to solve those. You have to, like Nick said, we have to be bringing the folks along with us, and we have to build collaborations and partnerships, and that's the only way that we succeed. And going back to the North Star, that is really resonates for me. However iteratively you want to deliver business value, however faster, how fast you want to be with the delivery, you have to have that North Star or the future state architecture, and without which you will be just building a swamp, and you will fail on several other aspects like speed to market and cost, and everything will be adding on. So having that future state and building it iteratively, maybe thinking of a bridge and building it in parts, but at the same time consumable. So that is the trade-off that we have to be thinking about.
I love where this conversation is going. I felt this energy in our prep session, but probably one of my favorite panels already that you guys having such good discussion. So you guys said a few things that I wanted to dig in on. And Stephen, I know we have your question in there. We'll get to that in a second. But Joe and Nick, you both just touched on this, right? This idea of trade-off versus balance versus flexibility. All these concepts to me are very intertwined. And yes, you have a North Star, which I think a lot of people, at least customers that we work with, very often that's not clear. And a lot of our job is to help you actually ask that question and challenge you a little bit. But how do you? I'll let Joe. I'll let you go with this one first. How are you advising people in your org on what trade-offs are okay? How to look at trade-offs? It could be between consolidation and flexibility. It could be between governance and agility. Like however you want to look at it, how do you start that conversation, or what do you advise there?
So, I mean, there are you could get some really great architecture out there, and build up some really state-of-the-art solutions that can scale up and can be the best in class. But the focus of what value have you delivered to the business? Sometimes it's 2 years, sometimes 3 years. There is no patience for that kind of build. So you have to have your idea focus again back to the business value, and how can you quickly deliver the business value, and you need to survive the next reorg. That is also really important in terms of being there out in the and having a seat at the conversation for them to be inviting you back. You need to start delivering business value. So again, this is all it all comes together. Having that future state architecture, having that the vision of where you want to be, and how do you understand what is the biggest business problem, and and you obviously have to make compromises as we go along. But I hope it is not on data governance, like getting the catalog, not having a good catalog, or not having a good data quality. I hope those are not the compromises you make. But anything that can deliver interim business value as you build your target state, and as you modernize your platform, those are the key for me.
Yeah, to Joe's point, like you got to be this tall to ride, regardless of ride we talk about, right? Like you got to have some just core capabilities in place. But I'm going to do a yes and to everything Joe just said, so I don't have to repeat any of that. I think one of the interesting pieces here that continue to kind of anchor down is, to that same conversation I mentioned this morning, towards the tail end of it, after being like a geek and excited about it, my immediate question was like, so what? Like, who cares? Who cares if we did that? What would the impact be? And one of the things I try to get to, and I've warned everybody here once I hit I'm getting close there to my 1 year mark. I was like, I'm going to start going into all the engineering teams mapped to any of the work that we're doing. And I'm going to ask anyone on the team, what's the impact of the work you're doing? And if they can't articulate it in business terms, we're going to stop. We're going to shut it down for as long as we need to do to make sure that we're actually delivering the thing the business cares about. And I think the number one reason why you see really good people leave companies is normally tied to, outside of people or leaders, normally it's tied to they don't see the value of their work, right? And people will stay through hard leaders and hard times and so forth, that they feel like they're making an actual impact, right? And I think this is where even in the community we're seeing now, and we're seeing it over here with people coming across other industries, to get to meaningful work and mission, mission type of impact. The more you can articulate that, and the more the teams can embody that, that's where I think transformation fully gets unlocked. And one of the other things is, like, you just can't define your culture with posters on the wall. It's just got to be part of the organic nature. And the cool part of even just seeing the transformation here in the last couple of quarters is, the first couple of roadshows I went on, questions I kept getting asked are like, all right, great, so when are we shutting down Teradata, right? When are we moving off of Oracle? When are we I'm like, it's the wrong question, right? It could be okay for Teradata to sit around for 20 more years. Honestly, I could probably do most of what we're talking about with Teradata. But what do we want to do tomorrow? Where are we going? And is that possible with Teradata? Is that possible with Oracle? Is that possible with these tools, right? Those start becoming the right question and going, great, if I can do those things we want to do tomorrow, can I also deliver those today? And what's the right cutover, right? And I think that goes a little bit to Stephen's question in the side over here is, what are the things we're actually what are we trying to move the needle on? Where are we really trying to go? To Joe's point, survive the next reorg, right? Is what are those big bets and big things that we're doing that are just foundational too, right? And everything you do, it has to be foundational to the next thing you do.
I really like that discussion. It's so valuable to have this focus on being able to prove and speak to what are the actual business outcomes that are being achieved here, and having that focus. One of the things I find, I guess I'll say frustrating, I don't know if that's the right word, but for all the projects we have with our customers, we're doing this prioritization, and what's surprising to me is how rarely it's actually a true business outcome or a dollar amount or an ROI amount that's driving what the priority is. And a lot of times it's more political, it's more of these buzzwords. It's, we need to do something with AI in the next X months. We need to, I think single source of truth used to be one of these buzzwords. We need to accomplish single source of truth by this. And instead of we need to be driving more revenue, we need to be reducing this cost, we need to be, doing these other more tangible and metric driven things. Is that a challenge you all run into with your organizations? And is that just the reality of the political game? You have to play into some of these more buzzword driven things, or do you push back and fight for really more metric driven outcomes?
I think, go ahead, Joe. You can start.
So Yeah, I mean, I've been in situations where the leadership calls and says, right now, why aren't we doing Snowflake? Because Snowflake went IPO, and the leadership looked at it and said, "Oh my God, this is the next best thing in data." And then we have to go back and reset our data strategy and say, this is where we are headed to. And Snowflake is not in our plan right now. But to your point again, the way that we do we have to endear to the business is through outcomes, and this has come out several times in this conversation. The political aspect will always be there, and you got to, yeah, in some cases, you have to balance some of that expectations with reality. In some cases, you may have to adopt some of the buzzwords, but the focus is as long as you're deriving, as long as you're providing business value, that is the most important part of it.
Yeah, I feel like there's two things will always be true on the business side. One that annoys us the most is they're going to go buy stuff that we'll have to figure out. There's really no kind of ever stopping that. You can build a better relationship so you can slow it down. The other is the Gartner buzzwords will always show up in leadership meetings or board discussions or otherwise. And I think this goes back to some of the culture is how do you turn that into value or turn that into real? Right. And as much as we want to be geeky, I don't know who's all in the audience, but like even we talk about agents today, honestly, it's automation, right? But it's getting funded at a materially different pace and the capabilities are materially evolving, right? Now, things like agentic, amazing. Like we're not there yet, but you can see where the ball is moving, right? So I think it's just the board cares about these kind of topics, right? But they're really asking is how are we driving more efficiency in our business? How are we driving more revenue? How do we as a company make money? Right. And how are we going to continue to make more of it? And they're hearing these things and reading about them that other folks are investing in that will help them make more money. So it's about that translation then into going, well, great. Well, here's the things we're working on. Here's how it connects into all of that. And honestly, we should be held accountable to those kind of questions, right? We should know how the markets continue to move. We should not be surprised that agents have popped out. We should not be surprised. We should already be thinking about how we're going to use agentic in the future. And to Joe's point, what that governed foundation is going to look like to make sure we treat the agent the same way we would treat a person. So we're not overprivileging users and looking for a new job next month or hopefully not being in jail because, we put stuff out we shouldn't have. So I think it's absolutely fair that these buzzwords hit us, but we also have to make sure that we're not getting surprised. We're kind of moving along with it. And we have enough flexibility in where we're going that we can address when these opportunities really pop up and they go from buzzword to reality.
I love it, man. Yes, Nick, agree with you. Very well said. I was going to actually just wrap up that last point before we start talking about just the impact of AI and all this stuff. I feel like we should be the ones helping balance this idea of legacy, what I already have, and how do I make that work with the constant barrage of new stuff that's coming at us, and the speed of that new stuff is just going up. But I love what you just said. Our job is to help you make sense of that and guide you in how to use those things and where to go next. And short-term versus long-term business value is really the levers, I think. And I love what the quote. I've been writing down quotes. The everything we build should be the foundation to the next thing. I think that's a great way to think about it because at least in a tech company, the constant conversation is tech debt versus the new thing that I got to build. And I feel like with all data architectures, that's starting to now become the common conversation. So I'm going to go back to Nick, to you, you mentioned AI a few times. In my life, just in my life, even if I don't talk about anything else, I did not think that this year I would be talking as much about agents and MCP and A2A last summer as I am now, right? It happened a lot faster. Even though I'm in this space and I study it, I still thought it happened a lot faster than we were expecting. And when our CEO was talking about it last year, we felt like, oh, no, it's a little bit away. And then boom, it was here. So in that world, right, how are you thinking about openness and flexibility and preparation? Is there anything like future readiness in this world now?
Yeah, I think it's about being future prepared, right? Enough flexibility in that ecosystem to make those pivots to really drive in. But there's absolutely those core components around the governance ecosystem, which I would put, catalog, entitlements, observability, quality, and data contracts as the emergent one, right? That I think that's your new kind of real full foundation. And then I think, utilizing Iceberg, especially in like a lake house and so forth, like that's just a continued evolution, right? These aren't really new things. It's just a continued maturity and evolution of the same patterns when you kind of take the step back and look at where things have moved. So I think for us, it's when we say things like AI, right? And my real AI junkie friends will say AI has been around for like 80 years now,
Yep, exactly.
right? And arguably, we're not really even doing AI when we talk about agents and agent to agent,
It's
right?
automation.
Because it's really about enabling even with RAG, right? It's a cleaner federation route where that's more optimized and more flexibility to continue to optimize that and change different parts of it, right? And so I think the exciting parts is these are still just foundational elements of where we're going to be in another year or two, right? Because that's what I allude to agentic, right? Agentic's going to be hard, right? Because I had this conversation again, another meeting this morning. It's been a long day. Another meeting this morning was like, hey, we were talking about like governance and of agents, right? And when to allow people to use what and what platforms. And you quickly go, well, are we treating the agent the same way we would treat a person? Right? Because the agent's getting activated as a person. But also, as I think agent to agent, do we have the same entitlements and auth function when that agent's going agent to agent across each of these different platforms? And I'll tell you, almost every company I've been at, right, that answer is no. And we're all trying to work towards it. And everyone I talk to and all the time I've spent on the street too, everyone's working on the same problem. So it's more of like, how are you differently attacking it? How are you giving yourself enough flexibility and enough grace to know, hey, there's enough risk here we're willing to take, and like let's go, let's learn, and let's be intentional about what use cases to start lighting up to make sure and really test out that foundation, right? So I think again, when we talk about AI, we talk about agents, it really keeps coming back to like, what's that core data foundation? We talk about being data ready for AI. Again, no one's data ready. So it's like, how risk adverse are you?
Mhm.
And how prepared are you to continue to be able to shift and adjust and adapt?
Joe, I want to ask you to expand on that, given you're in a regulated space as well. How are you guys thinking about this stuff?
Yeah,
Because
yeah. I
so
mean, I
much to
want.
balance.
Yeah, Sab, I want to pick up on one word that, or to words that Nick said, data ready. And what is fascinating to me personally about AI, and this is just addition to Nick, the business value and all that beyond. When I look at the data architecture and building a modernized data platform, the role of AI is so valuable now. So you think about the days when you had to connect to your source system, bring in data, create those pipelines, and bring the data in. And when the schema changes or when there are additional columns added, your data gets outdated, and the products that you create, it takes a long time and a lot of cost to bring that additional data in. And then your now business is extracting this data and adding additional data in their own systems. And think about the models that you had to create, the pipelines that you had to create to build, to conform to those models, and then denormalize it, and then create this reporting. But what AI does and makes data ready is enormous. And today we have tools. There's no tool that does it end to end, but we have tools that does parts of all of this. And I'm sure there are vendors out there trying to see that all of this can be automated. There are tools, ingestion tools, for example, that are metadata based and that can plug into your source system and create automated pipelines into your data environment. And it can account for schema changes. And when the data comes in, there are tools that can look at the data that is coming in and saying, this is a logical model and this is a normalized model that you can create. And then it can also create those pipelines, automated pipelines into those models. And there are tools that can look at say a SQL server, look at all the SSIS processes and say this is the logic, and automatically create a pipeline to bring that data in, and then run in parallel and match the two. And there are AI tools that can look at data and say, these are the quality rules that need to be applied. And if you say yes, and they will be automatically applied.
Yep.
And then there are tools that can look at reports and say, these are the 55 reports that you have, and you don't need those reports. And you can rationalize them and get industry standard definition of these metrics and create that. So the power of data within getting, latching onto the two words that Nick said, data ready, AI, the value of AI in making data ready is huge. And I can go on about this, but that whole ecosystem of acquiring data, making it consumable, and making it valuable, and automating these pipelines, the things that we created with hand coding them and with months or sometimes years to get all of this ready, is now looking so eminently doable within weeks.
I think that's an important point. Is like I remember years ago we talked about like the citizens analyst, right? And now it became the citizens data scientist. And we also used to like, try to figure out how do we make five data scientists feel like 15? How do we make 15 feel like 300? I think goes back to like, and I was thinking about Stephen's question in the comment and listening to Joe talk. It's like everything Joe just said, I could have said 10 years ago what Sprox inside Teradata. Right? I could have said, 5 years ago with Airflow, right? And running these DAGs and automating these flows and work. So like, I can't tell you how many times I've had to rebuild Airflow in companies at this point, right? Like agents are, again, another part of this continued evolution that's much a little bit more easier to navigate to allow anybody to kind of self-service, right? It's same thing with ELT versus ETL, right? Like it's not moving fast enough. How do I shift left, right? Throw my Gartner terms out there, right? And make it easier for folks to self-service, right? Again, agents is another kind of along this flow. And if you think about it that way, you already have that all deployed. It's just how are you making it easier and easier and allowing that full, federation of those capabilities, right? Democratizing those teams, right? To be able to do that easier while you still have that government view and spectrum view of who's doing what and where, right? And then you can really go, great, let me now protect the spectrum while I'm really allowing the teams to go faster and really thinking about enablement much more, right? And deployment patterns much more than it is about, hey, we have all of this stuff to build.
Yeah, no, adding on to Nick, I mean, we have this much stuff to build is complex. And last week we were looking at a project, and we're looking at saying, yeah, we need two data analysts here to do this data. And we were discussing, why don't we throw an LLM at it and say, call one of those standard models. And those models returned with the right kind of prompt engineering, and we didn't have to clone them and make it our own or add on to anything, just standard delivered models. We were able to replicate what a data analyst could have done in 3 months in a matter of 10 minutes. So think about the value that the agentic AI or the current models are already delivering, and it doesn't require a lot of energy to replicate it, a lot of investments. It's all out there, and you can access that. And how do you turn that into value for yourself, and how can you govern your data better? How can you reduce the time to market for those solutions? So there is a lot out there that we need to think about when we start even thinking about a project or thinking about building something.
Yeah, if I add one more here, and maybe Sav, I can open up a route for you to change topic or shift in or otherwise. But I think it goes back to the question you asked of like how do you continue to prepare for that speed and openness and so forth. And I think the other trend that's super exciting out there is that data as a product, not data products, but the data as a product. And really thinking about like I think of like projects like Nessie, right? That I think is emerging into Polaris, for example, right? And capabilities I think back to Teradata, give them some love, so not taking shots, like had in their platform for years, is like that Git-like experience with data, right? And you see it with DBT, for example. I think most platforms out there are kind of thinking about how do I run this as like a marketplace with reusability and branching, so that way we can fail safely. We can allow teams to be able to, reuse much more inside the ecosystem. It's going to necessitate much more maturity around things like the data contracts, right, and change control. But I think those are the types of patterns where, hey, as you're picking new technology and new vendors, how open is the ecosystem, right? What does my resilience look like? What does failure look like? How do I respond to that? How much reuse is available to here? Can I put a business user that doesn't understand anything about technology in this platform? Right. I think those are now becoming like those first couple of questions you ask when you move into architectural review boards or otherwise go, all right, when we're making changes now, these just have to be core and foundational things that we're considering.
I love it. Every time I write a note about what I want to talk about next, you say it already. So it making my life pretty simple. But what I love about what you guys are saying is just this idea that AI is helping us be ready for AI in a way that I don't think we imagined. And especially Gen AI and LLMs, I think is probably the thing that pivoted that for a lot of us who were not in that space. In Tealium issue, right? Data normalization, the AI is actually helping us get there so much faster, and we're not having to go back and do some of the things we would have done. We're doing it differently, and I think it's a real unlock. And that power, I think, is what's so motivating and exciting about it. And then you throw on there the idea there's so many more companies are talking to us about thinking about data as a product. That I think is legitimately becoming a motion now that before it was more in the mature category or the advanced category, that's separating your data from the technology, separating your data from other things and thinking of it just in its by itself. And how do you make it a superpower? And I think AI is actually the unlock to make it a superpower for your company now in a way that you've never imagined before. A simple idea, right? Talk to your data. Just that concept, which started a couple of years ago, it's completely flipping data analytics on its head. It's completely flipping reporting on its head. And like you said, Joe, I could actually set up a trigger. I could say, figure this out, find me a problem, suggest me a solution, and then just let me approve and go do it for me before I even get involved. That is the real going from 5 to 15 data scientists. I think that magic is amazing. So you know what I've been trying to figure out now is a data platform ourselves, right? Is we have and you mentioned something, Nick, that every company you've gone to, you've started transformation or data strategy. So let me ask you guys, both you and Joe, and then Dustin, I would love to hear from you as well. Is that how do you start that? Like, where do you start? You have so many different things that are coming. But every time you show up at a new company, I'm sure your Lego blocks that you're playing with are totally different, even though similar. So how do you start that conversation? Where do you start?
Yeah, I like you threw Lego out there because I got a funny story if we have time for that one. But I've actually started at this point. I kind of start the same exact spaces with two routes. One is just a full audit, right? And I think about the audit in a business kind of level context. And we did the same thing here, where like I pull folks into a room, smart people across the whole company, right? And I just put on the whiteboard like the simplest fact, right? I need to get data, I need to move data, I need to enrich data, I need to store data, I need to serve data. Outside of now the governance space of like cataloging and secure it, there's nothing else we do with data. So we audit, and like interestingly here, it's like what you find out in almost every company, you end up having like 15 to 20 tools in one category. In some cases, zero or one or two in the other ones. And if you put a heat map on that, you really quickly get to see of like, all right, like confront brutal facts. Where am I at? What
80/20,
do I
right?
have
You're using
today?
20% of your tools. Yeah, I love
The
it.
beauty of that too is you end up seeing like, oh, wait a minute, right? Like here, a number of our teams didn't really have like full on enterprise level of observability capabilities. I'm like, wait a minute, but we have Dynatrace, right? So that's an easy low hanging fruit. We can just go clean that up. Nobody even has to worry about that. Then you get into the bigger topics like, do we have end-to-end spectrum visibility with catalog, right? And more specifically down the metadata side to really enable, because right, how does an agent even know where to go get data? It has to have visibility to the catalog. So like there's that one part just like cleaning up your house, right? Before you even talk about the other areas. But in parallel, it's always an audit back from the business. Like you got to do the road shows. You got to like, what do we care about? What are we trying to do? I was chatting with a friend yesterday who's working on a pretty big project at a Fortune 100 company right now. And he was asking, he was like, well, how do I get this thing from like the skunkworks team I'm working on to like, I want to make this massive. Like, how do we spin out like a tech arm for this company? Or does this become an open source project? He's like, and I told him, I was like, dude, go literally get on Perplexity or whatever your tool of choice is, have it scan the last 5 different earnings reports to figure out what's the board and what is the company talking about. You've got to make it real. You've got to use the language of the business and not the language of technology. And you've got to make it mean something to them. How does what you're doing change how they do business? And like, what does that really unlock, in terms of where it's going to go? And if you can make that language connect to things you're trying to do technically, everything will change.
I mean,
Wow.
if I can add on to what Nick said, it's just to add on everything that Nick said and more. Think about how you can get data and analytics to be part of the business strategy or the or the business priorities. How can you embed that within those is the key. How do you think about that? And understand what are the different problems. And if they tie back to data quality, that's a easy out that you have, an easy entrance that you have into the business. But again, if you can increase top line growth and you have increased profitability or have some cost savings measures, how can data and AI enable that? And that will invite you to the seat at the table, will give you a seat at the table. And from there, and the point that Nick made, it doesn't matter where data resides, and that's your problem. That's how you provide that kind of a transparency between what happens within the data and what systems that you're migrating, or where it resides, is it centralized versus federated, what is the short term versus long term. If you can insulate the business and start solving those problems, that's when transformation becomes real and you get more budget, and then you can do the back end technology work that you've been putting off for so long.
Yeah, I think Joe had a good point I want to double down on is one of the other things I would absolutely, especially in this environment, push folks to talk about like self-funding, right? Back to that audit, like what can I shut down to fund those other gaps that I have? I can't just go the first thing I do and say, great, to go drive this transformation, I need X amount of, X million dollars. Right? It's got to be, hey, look, here's where I see the efficiencies, here's where I see opportunities, and here's where the impact can be to the business. Here's what I can already show you. Seed fund me, right? Don't walk in there asking for the $120 million. Like that world's gone. Going in there going, hey, and one of the leaders here actually told me the other day, he was like, you talk a lot about, and eat a lot of cheeseburgers that you want to pay for tomorrow. And I'm like, yeah, but that cost tomorrow looks really good and a cheeseburger tastes awesome. I was like, but tomorrow I'm shutting 5 things down for this one thing I'm bringing in. All 5 of those are more expensive than this one. Right. And it's like, and oh, by the way, here's what would have happened if this was in place a year ago. Here's what's going to happen a year from now with it getting in place. And it's just, when you put it in that kind of space, like it's hard, like people have money, right? Like there's money in the business. People are always funding, opportunities in space and what's going to continue to really unlock them. And if you can, again, putting those things in the business terms, that funding route makes it much easier to be able to navigate down versus trying to survive.
Yeah, exchanging the investment for outcomes. And I really like the idea of the stewardship aspect of here's how I'm also investing into this outcome that I want and funding it from that. I know we're coming up on the allotted time for this. I think one thing I really want to emphasize from talking to both of you, it's been incredible just listening. And I appreciate that you're both in insurance and regulated industries. And from my perspective, when I work across a broad range of industries, one thing you guys keep bringing up and almost implying it's kind of an assumed given is this idea of data governance, data catalog, this intentionality to the control and putting the right pieces in place that the data is regulated and controlled. And for a lot of other companies outside of regulated industries, that's not an assumed concept. And that's something that I really want to emphasize has to be still a starting point, even if you're not in a regulated industry. Because once you start to want to do more on the edge, more flexibility on the edge, more with these AIs, more democratizing of the data as a product for value, if you don't have that core foundational piece of defining what your data governance strategy is, it'll just make things messier and it won't actually add value. It'll just add noise.
Yeah, I think every industry is regulated, like
Well,
as much as
highly regulated.
yeah. No, because like I worked in the agency, right? And I'm like, I don't think I'll work anywhere with more regulations than I had there. I've also been in retail, right, where folks think you can kind of do almost anything. And I think, what you're seeing now is, again, read the tea leaves of where the world's going around regulations around consumer data, right? And then derived data is the other fun one that's continuing to kind of emerge out, right? Because I remember my days even back in Concur where it's like, oh no, I can just, right? I can mask some of this, or I can take out some of these columns, and like, great, SAP bought us for a couple $2 billion because of our data. Whereas like now people are coming back going, no, that's my data, or you derived it from my data. And like all of this is having to change, right? And understanding the lineage of where the data comes from. And people are now going to jail by not knowing better, right? So you can't even claim ignorance on what's happening inside your ecosystem. So I think these are foundational things that where I look at highly regulated industries, I'm like, you're actually ahead of the game a little bit,
Mhm.
right? And I think if you look at it from that perspective, it's like, hey, look, now I'll go grab all the things that were like, so my first couple of hires in here since I've been here, I pulled from retail, I pulled from music and intelligence around next best, right? And in those kind of areas, I pulled in from FSI, where it's like, look, some of these areas, like you want to do next best product or next best message, like go pull from retail, right? Or go pull from gaming, who's been doing that for 25 years, right? But now it's just a matter of like, go pull those folks in and give them a couple more requirements. But I
Mhm.
guarantee you they'll say it's still possible.
Yeah.
And I think that's the part of like really transforming and disrupting some of these other spaces is bring those people in that didn't know that it was always this hard because they found a way and they had a way and these regulations are hitting them too. And they're
Mhm.
just coming in with a couple more requirements if I can make it that simple.
Yeah. Maybe a little bit slower in the short term, but better and more value driven in the long term and opens up more possibilities.
Ooh. Love it. Yeah, I mean, I that reminds me of the quote that Joe had earlier that you can't take 2 and 3 years to deliver business value. You got to survive the next reorg. I totally agree. I think you got to think about the now and the middle term and the long term. You know, audience, if you guys have any more topics you want us to cover, please ask us. Otherwise, the last thing I wanted to bring up is, I was at the Databricks conference a month ago, and every single person who came to our booth brought up the idea of real time because we had it written on our booth because we're a real time platform. Everybody wanted to know how real time are you? How are you guys doing that? What is your latency? It seems like AI has changed the role of real time conversation, especially with the expectation that if I'm going to do an MCP or RAG or A2A, I need immediate response. Are you guys having to deal with that yet? Where do you guys sit on that conversation?
Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, I'm sure there are real-time use cases. Again, the first preference would be to say, understand, do you really need it real time, or is it near real time? Is it what is the value that you want to get? And of course, there is, like we have discussed, the future state architecture. How do you integrate that real time, and how do you start persisting it and making sense? What kind of architecture do you want to create in such a way that you bring the real time, but at the same time, you can persist it and get additional analytics out of it. So there are a few use cases, and we are working on it. But our preference would be to understand: do you really need real time, and how real is that data, or is it near real time?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think it goes back to like what business problem are you trying to solve and how's the business trying to solve it? And like super interesting, I'll say a little while ago, to be safe, to speak it nebulously. Like I was asked to go like, hey, we want to be able to do this particular thing with customers real time as they're coming through funnel, right? And I was just like, great, well, how's that work today? And they're like, well, we have like a monthly upload and then like our models are updated every 3 weeks. And I was like, cool. If I could give you that data as of 5 o'clock last night and have it fully updated by 9 o'clock this morning, and you can do anything you want with that and interact with it, like what would that mean to you? Oh my God, that'd be crazy. I'm like, great. So you just literally defined a batch improvement, right?
Yeah.
Not even talking about event-based at this point. And I was like, cool, I can give you that in 6 months and not 18. I was like, but I can give you a 9 instead if I don't work on that in the next 6 months and still half the time you're asking for. I can give you a way to event off of that within seconds, right? Or even some cases, milliseconds, depending on what you want to do. But I can do that off of seconds. They're like, oh my God, that would transform our whole business. Like, we didn't think that was possible for 5 or 10 more years. And I'm like, guess what? I still never said real time.
Yeah.
Because like people aren't really trying to do things real time. They want the ability or capability to potentially do things real time.
Yep.
And I think that bucket, to Joe's point, becomes really small. And we are absolutely working on those use cases, right? But the other thing is like, it's more about how can I do these things faster and more
Yeah.
mature and deliver the experiences that my customers expect when they expect it.
Yeah.
I think that's more of like, we're talking about more near real time with
Yep.
the flexibility of how close do you get or how far away do I get based on the cost and how can our company even do things in a real time nature? Will we make real time decisions on the back end? Right. So I think it goes back to more event based than it is real time.
Well, and I love that you broke that down because this real time gets I think it gets a bad rap because somebody thinks every part of my chain has to be real time, which is so not true, right? My model can run every hour, every day, whatever I need. I just need to be able to use that score exactly when I need to use it. Just that last mile could be real time, and everything else doesn't have to. And it could be milliseconds or seconds, depending on my exact business use case. But I do think that's what is, at least I'm noticing when we talk to customers and partners, that's what's changing. Is just I just need the right part of my value chain to be real time. The rest of it can work however it's supposed to work. And I think I love the way data technology is evolving so that I can make some of these choices now. I'm like you guys said earlier, I'm not forced into one platform. I have the options, and all the examples you gave, Joe, about all the different AI tools, right now they're all different companies, all different options, and it's all starting to blend. So I love it. So as we get to our end, let me ask each of you, I'll start with you, Dustin. What's one thing that we want to leave our audience with as they go on their own journeys with this stuff?
I think the main topic that I've found value in from today is that balance of understanding what are your core things that you want to be rigid and define it as your, these are the rules that we stand by. They're very structured. And then where do you have flexibility and balance and allow for autonomy and creativity and prototyping? And being able to reinforce those positions to be able to be consistent and stable while still iterating and adapting and being prepared for what's next.
I love it. Joe, what about you?
There is no one silver bullet that will solve all of these problems. There is no one architecture that you can say will suit for your use case. There are some general principles, there are some certain guidelines, there are certain best practices, and you have to understand what are your priorities, what are the goals, how do you accomplish them, where is your data, how much time it takes to bring that in, and how to derive value. So each one of us data leaders have to focus on understanding what business problem are we solving, how much time does it take, is it the big uplift that you are expecting, and you have to come up and define your architecture. You have to define your priorities.
I love it. Nick, what about you? Bring us home.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of like as I was getting blown up in text message by a couple of leaders here while we were in this conversation. As we move into the world of agentic, um, it's going to be expensive. And it's going to require capabilities and a level of excellence that most companies are going to need to rapidly get to. And I think whether you're a data leader or you're somebody that's working on delivery, I think there's a hard moment here where, finding these skill sets and these talents is it's extremely hard, but companies aren't hiring hundreds of them, and they're not out there. So I think, getting ramped up on these capabilities and these tools, like I've told our people here, I was like, there's not somebody that every single person that's come to me about investing and getting training or certifications, we've said yes to. Like, go push. Every company is trying to work on these capabilities, and it's going to be less of hundreds of people working on projects and more of, like, again, less vendor lock-in, but more, third party leaning on, right?
Yep.
Like the amount of SaaS tools and applications are only going to continue to grow even as you consolidate. So I think, the level of excellence to integrate and deploy is where I think really you're going to see the separation in some of these companies. And then having some of those core principles like open ecosystems, open architecture, iceberg, and so forth, like those are the bets that you need to be making on and continue to get smarter in.
I love it. My favorite takeaway was the discipline at the core, flexibility at the edge, and innovation in the middle. Like I love that vision, and I think that's real. That's where we all end up. But I don't think we realize that that's what we're going to have to work with. And
Respect to my buddies in France, that was Michelin, so I do quote them, but
But it
that's
was such
great.
a perfect description for
Yeah.
me, just the stuff we deal with. So we're at time. I think this has been one of my favorite panels. I feel very fortunate that I got to chat with you guys, Nick and Joe
You
and
better
Dustin.
tell every future panel that they're number 2 or 3. So,
Staff says this on every panel, so it's
yeah.
Yeah, well, but I
Joe and
meant
I are going to log into one of the future ones
yeah.
quietly just to see.
Well, I do mean it this time a lot. I learned a lot. I felt like I didn't have to do anything. But thank you so much to our listeners and our audience. Thank you guys for joining and staying with us. And Joe, Nick, Dustin, thank you for making time and sharing all your experience and your learning. And CDO Magazine, thank you for having us. So bye, everybody. Happy Wednesday. Have a nice day.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.
Yeah.